Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Steven Pynakker, and like I like to say, all the voices of the restoration are heard here on Mormon Book Reviews, and we're going to hear another expression of the restoration today. Now, of course, many of you know Evan Sharley. She's been on the program many, many times, and recently has kind of joined up with Rob Lauer in the Reform Mormonism movement. And they're actually got a conference coming up very soon that we want to talk about. But Rob, it's been a couple of years. I want to welcome you back to the program. How you doing
Good to
today,
be
sir?
back. I'm doing great. Happy to be here.
And Evan, it's always a pleasure to have you on. Thanks again for showing up.
Yep, I love being here.
So that's great. So before we get started, I just wanted to first of all just let you know, Rob, that while my mom was in recovery from her hip operation, I gave her a bunch of different books. She asked me for some books, and I just thought, oh, this had just come in the mail. You had sent it to me. And it's Three Plays for Latter-day Saints by Rob Lauer. And my mom read the Digger one, and she really enjoyed it. And of course, this also includes the Beehive State and the Blessings of Jacob. And of course, you did a sit down like a year or so ago with Mormonish, where you get a where you guys did the Digger play or something like a
We did
readers.
Beehive State. We actually did a stage reading in Utah. Yep.
That's okay of the Beehive State. That's right.
Yep.
So my mom really she's read plays before, but she said it was really kept her interest. She thought it was well done and well developed,
Well,
well
thank you.
written.
I'm
So you
pleased to
get the
hear that.
seal of approval from mom
Thanks,
on that.
Mom.
So I before we get started here, first of all, I want you both to kind of talk about your backgrounds because both of you are part of the are have been part of the restoration and are still part of the
All right.
restoration
Yep.
and have had very interesting journeys within the context of the restoration. And Rob, since it's been a couple years since you've been on, maybe just kind of reintroduce yourself to the audience and kind of give a little bit of your background and what led you to engage in this unique, very interesting movement within the restoration.
Well, my name's Rob Lauer. I was born in Portsmouth, Virginia, and raised here. And that is, if anyone is familiar with evangelical Christianity or Christian broadcasting, that's sort of the birthplace of Christian broadcasting. And I was raised in a mainstream denomination, United Methodist, so I was tended to be more progressive, not as literalistic. But for some reason, I just always took Jesus and the Bible very seriously as a kid. And my parents were not religious. We just lived in the South and everybody went to church. It was what you did in the 60s and 70s. And but I took it all very seriously and began studying the Bible in elementary school. Granted, I didn't understand a lot of it, but I was sort of the religious nerd in my family. And by the time I was about 14 or 15, having spent my life reciting the various creeds and stuff in church every Sunday, the Nicene Creed and the Apostles' Creed and the Korean Creed and all of these, I just realized, came to the realization that I really did not believe a lot of the key elements of Christian theology. But I still very much believed in Jesus and the message of Jesus and the message of the Bible, the prophetic strain of the Bible. And so I began doing some research. I came across Mormons in American history class. I began reading for 2 years, everything I could find, starting out with No Man Knows My History. I read stuff by the Tanners. I basically, within my first week, I knew about the Temple Endowment, the Masonic links, all the controversial stuff, Joseph Smith's magic and money digging. And the only thing I really had problems with, because this would have been 1975, 76, 77, was the black policy. But from what I was seeing in the news, that was something that so many Mormon celebrities were sort of hounded about, the Osmonds in particularly. I figured, well, this will just change. They'll change this in a couple years. They'll have to. And so after I sort of converted to Mormon theology, I wrote the LDS Church. They sent missionaries. I joined, uh, went to BYU, graduated from BYU, and majored in playwriting, wrote Digger and some other Mormon plays there. But once I got to the LDS Church, the authoritarian nature of it really bothered me. And the idea that you had to go through the priesthood authorities of the church leaders, it was sort of like they were your mediators to Christ, who is your mediator with the Father, sort of chain of command, really bothered me. And I didn't really find much to support that in early Mormon theology. I knew that priesthood had been introduced into the church, 5, 6 years later, and really had not been at the time of Joseph Smith's death. He did not develop in the way that Brigham Young and his apostles later did. But I was always fascinated with Mormon history and realized when I was at BYU, my last year, that was when Packard and some of the other general authorities started really slamming objective history, Mormon history. And so by the time I graduated, I decided to leave the church. I actually flirted with becoming a minister. I actually was a lay minister of the United Methodist congregation for about 6 months in 1985. No, I'm sorry, in 83. And but decided against that and continued on into theater, which I don't know, there seems to be a link between entertainment and organized religion in America these days. But I was returned to the LDS Church in '94 when I was living in New York. And my whole understanding, I wasn't really expecting anything. I just wanted to be part of an organization, a congregation that sort of spoke my language theologically. But when I joined, I had really changed even more. It was even more Protestant. But I stayed with it until 2003. I was very active. I was a temple worker. I taught temple prep. All my years in the LDS Church, I was always the gospel doctrine teacher or the elders quorum teacher. I love teaching the theology and the doctrines and exploring those ideas. But in 2003, I came to terms with my homosexuality and I left the church. And a year after that, I discovered Reform Mormonism online as a website and found out it existed for 2 years. And I didn't know it intrigued me. And what it actually Reform Mormon is, it's not an attempt to change the LDS Church. It has no connection with the LDS Church Community of Christ. It's Reform Mormonism is like Reformed Judaism. It's just a different approach to theology in general. So if you thought of the LDS Church as Orthodox Jewish and maybe Community of Christ is called conservative Jewish, we're like Reformed
Okay.
Judaism.
Okay. So that, and so just when we're looking like at reform, we're not trying, because sometimes people, when they say reform, they're thinking reformed
Right.
Christianity.
And over the years, because I've been with this now for good grief, 21 years. And over the years online in different chat rooms and websites and stuff, people have said, well, the Reformed LDS Church, it's like, no, no, we're not the Reformed LDS Church. Even our understanding of church is different from the LDS Church's understanding what a church is. But no, we've reformed the way we approach faith. We are more concerned with the ethical aspects of it as opposed to the theological or the ceremonial aspects of it or the legalistic aspect of a religion. We look at theology as a figurative model. You can take it literally or as story, but it gives you a grounding for developing morals and your ethics and your sense of self and your understanding of the things that we can't explain at this point. And so that's our approach to faith.
Hmm.
And
Well, that's interesting. And I just wanted to point out to people in the audience, because you were on a couple of years ago, but your digger play was while you were at BYU,
yes.
and it was highly regarded. Even Orson Scott Card said some high praise for
Oh
this.
yeah, he's the one that actually I was resident to turn it in, and he I turned it into my advanced playwriting class where he was the guest teacher in summer of '81, and he really championed it, gave it all the professors. But what was odd was this was 3 years before the Hoffman Salamander letter, so
Hmm.
nobody knew anything about Joseph Smith, peepstones, stones and hats, magic, and all this. But that's what I was dramatizing. And I
Hmm.
did it in such a way that I thought I was faithful to history without it being a religious polemic or an anti-Mormon polemic. It was just a play about a 19-year-old meeting a 20-year-old girl and he does this for a living. And she sort of, through the relationship, he changes and she changes too. And they run off and get married.
So that, and then of course, then you also were involved for many years with the Hill Cumorah pageant.
Yeah, from '97 until 2003, I was associate director of the Hill Cumorah pageant. Yeah.
So definitely you've had a very interesting journey in the restoration. I'm glad you're able to give a synopsis of it. And Evan, I just wanted to say, it's kind of been an interesting journey that you've been having, and in many ways on this program. You know,
Yep.
uh, you kind of came out there and told your story, um, and then documented your journey into the community of Christ and also out of the community of Christ.
Yep.
And so you've had a very unique and interesting story to tell. And of course, you've been on a few times. And maybe just give us a brief synopsis of your journey and then what got you interested in going into the Reform Mormon direction.
So I grew up LDS here in Boise, Idaho, and I read the CES letter like a week before I turned 21, and uh, I left the LDS church because I read the CES letter. Um, and kind of after that, I figured out that I'm bisexual, I'm polyamorous. Eventually, I figured out I'm transgender as well. And, um, but I still felt this connection to Mormonism. I kind of had a layover, spiritually speaking, in Buddhism. For a time being, I studied Buddhism for about 2 years, took a ministry course there. But the restoration is home. And so I was listening to Bryce Blankenagle's Naked Mormonism podcast, and he mentioned the Smith entheogen theory, which psychedelics have also become a big part of my spiritual practice. And I heard him talk about how the Kirtland Temple dedication very well may have included an entheogenic aspect to it, which had always been a really big part of my spiritual aspirations. And so um, that kind of led me to say, like, I'm going to re-examine the restoration, this heritage that I was given, to see if there's anything that I can keep from it. So I looked around, and Community of Christ seemed to be the best place for me at the time. I ended up joining there. Um, I enjoyed my time there. I'm glad that I was there, but Community of Christ ended up passing, or their first presidency ended up implementing a policy which essentially made polyamorous families kind of second class. Polyamorous people aren't allowed to hold priesthood in Community of Christ, and um, my family and I deserve our dignity. And so that was no longer the place for me. Um, After I resigned, Steve, you actually said, "Hey, you should go talk to Rob Lauer and the Reform Mormons." And I didn't listen to you at the time. Um, but I talked to Rob about mid 2024 on the phone
Mhm.
for a couple of hours.
Yeah.
Um, I went to Rob's presentation at Sunstone in 24. Then Rob and I had another long conversation.
Yeah.
Is that December or November?
Yep.
Um, but I kind of felt comfortable identifying as a Reformed Mormon at that point. And I warned Rob, like, I'm very passionate. So if you give me the go ahead to be a passionate Reformed Mormon, I'll get some gears turning, because Mormonism has always been a passion of mine, and I want to create or help create community for weird Mormons like myself and Rob. And
I was talking to my mom the other day, and I said, that Mormonism is intrinsically weird in its own way. Like it's weird. I'm always one of those people like I want to get one of those shirts that said keep Mormonism weird.
Oh yeah, I'd love to have one of those.
with the Joseph Smith Sphinx on it.
Oh yeah, yeah. And just so you know, the very first time I ever flew out to Utah, just give you a little background, doing my this whole thing was in summer of 2021. And I get picked up at the airport by Rick Bennett wearing his big yellow Gospel Tangents t-shirt. So I'm just enamored. I mean, first of all, I'm flying on the flight, and guess who I sit next to? I sit next to Thomas Monson, a person who was Thomas Monson's personal nurse
Yeah.
and was a personal nurse to many other general authorities and to Eldridge Smith, the last patriarch of the church. And so just an interesting conversation who was that's a wild story how she ended up on that plane. And that realized is like, oh my gosh, just like this is a God thing. But here Rick picks me up and he's like, so do you want to go to see the Sphinx? And I'm like, the Joseph Smith Sphinx? He's like, yeah, absolutely. So that was the first stop we made. Unbeknownst to me, probably 90% of people who live in Utah have never been there, don't know anything
I
about
went
it.
to BYU. I was there for 4 years, and I did not see it until I went to Sunstone this past August. And
Okay.
they had one of the events there one evening.
It's so crazy to me. But I love the interesting things about Mormonism make it unique. I also love the convergence of evangelical Protestant Christianity kind of permeates the Book of Mormon. I think that
Yeah.
there's so many different things about Mormonism that I find so fascinating. And I think that's really the most important thing is because for a lot of people within the mainstream church, it's sometimes it's a one size fits all mentality, and often there are people that are on the just the borderlands, the people that are kind of maybe not mainstream, people that are kind of from alternative communities that maybe don't feel like this is a comfort or a safe space for them, but they still want to be part of the restoration. And I kind of think that's kind of the vision that you had, Rob, and the founders of it. Maybe speak to why it was important to for you to have joined this group and what the founding principles
Well,
were.
I got when I went to the website in 2000, the original website in 2000, February of 2004, and at that point it was a much bigger website. And Mike Rashan, who started the movement in Seattle, uh, owns that original website, and was basically inviting anybody who wanted to submit papers that he would publish on there. He had tons of papers on there, long papers that people. So I had a couple that I've been working on that I had no, just about Mormon theology. So I sent them to him, and right away he said, "Do you have some more?" And I sent him some more, and then I started writing for the website, and then he asked me to write for the blog. But Mike was raised LDS and went on his mission, I guess, in probably the mid '80s, and was in up the Palmyra area mission. And but came back and after his mission realized he just did not believe the truth claims of the church. And so he left and basically identified as an atheist for years. And then it was probably in the mid 90s, late 90s, he discovered what was then called the New Mormon History. It's now just Mormon Studies. But he thought all these great histories that had been written, they'd been published by Signature Books and University of Utah and University of Illinois, that he had no awareness of while he was in the church and growing up in the church. So he began reading them and became fascinated with Mormon history and Mormon culture. And he realized that, much like Edmund was speaking, this was still his culture. This was still part of him, even though he had walked away from the corporate church. And he began to try to figure out a rational approach to Mormonism that would work with him. And as he spoke to disinfected members and former LDS members and saw the bitterness that many of them had because there was nothing for them once they left the LDS church. They were just sort of out there to make their way. He said, well, it's up to us to make something of Mormonism that will speak to us. And that's sort of how Reform Mormonism was born. And it basically, it's a more rational approach to Mormonism. It focuses on the individual rather than belonging to an organization, following the dictates of an organization. It's non-hierarchical. Um, it's the theology. We sort of build upon the most, I guess, the most radical aspects of Mormon theology. The ideas that are found like in LDS D&C section 88 and 91 and King Folly Discourse and even lectures on faith about the nature of the divine and the human. And we accept the idea like the couplet is man now as God once was, as God now as man may become. We have a more expanded view of it, but that's sort of the basis. We believe that the divine and the human share common nature. And that's very radical. It doesn't really fall into LDS, current LDS theology. It certainly is not consistent with Christian theology or even monotheism. So we basically, well, like for most of us, many of us, Christ is still central, his teachings and his character. We don't identify necessarily as Christian. We realize that Mormonism has theologically moved beyond Christianity in the same way that Christianity moved beyond Judaism. And so we're very comfortable with saying, no, we're not Christians, we're Mormons. That doesn't mean that, Christ isn't important to many of us. He's central to my understanding of things, but it's not necessarily the Christian understanding of Christ. For me, it's the teachings of Jesus, the example of Jesus, and not the theology, the religion that was built around Jesus hundreds of years after his death, when Christianity became the Roman Empire's religion, and the original church fathers began deciding through councils what Christian theology was. So, I don't know. That's
So,
sort of
so
where
in
I
one
am.
sense, interestingly enough, you kind of draw your roots from 19th century Mormonism, some of the radical ideas that were around at the
Yeah,
time,
and it was
and
weird
also
from the
the idea
beginning.
that a lot of people had different ideas. There wasn't like
Right.
one, you could have people, even general authorities disagreeing with each other, or apostles disagreeing with each other,
Yeah.
but there was this really, this experiment of Mormonism going
And,
on.
and the mechanism, the way the church was organized, and the way the original church or the way the original Mormon communities organized their churches, if you read the D&C, is nothing like the way the church became organized under Brigham Young and his apostles later on, where it became very hierarchical. You really had a division of power. Bishops could call trials and try to excommunicate the president of the high priesthood if they wanted to. The highest authority where you were was the stake president, not the president of the high priesthood. And so each church had autonomy, and it was very Protestant. It was in the way
Hmm.
it was laid out. It was very American, very democratic. Even under Joseph Smith. We tend to I think we can tend to conflate Joseph Smith with Brigham Young. LDS Mormons do, and they seem to only be able to see Joseph Smith through the prism of Brigham Young, and they were two very different men. And I keep wanting to remind them, remember, none of Joseph Smith's immediate family followed Brigham Young. They all
Right.
were opposed to him. None of them agreed with what he was doing.
Very true. And I'm just really curious, just from a theological thing, like what do you do like with the whole Adam God thing? Like,
Again, we don't.
I
People can work things out for themselves. You speak to this, Evan.
um so in this conference that Rob and I are helping organize, um what I am going to be speaking on is the changing perspectives of God in the Restoration. Um, in 1842, Joseph Smith articulated his Articles of Faith, the 11th of which is, "We claim the privilege of worshiping Almighty God according to the dictates of our own conscience, and allow all men the same privilege, let them worship how, where, or what they may." Growing up, I was kind of taught like, we as a block have what we believe, and it wasn't necessarily at an individual level. I very much believe it should be more at an individual level. And so I'm going to be talking about all of these different ways that the divine has kind of manifested within the restoration. I, like you said earlier, Steve, think that weird Mormonism is best Mormonism. Um, the Adam God doctrine is a very unique thing to Mormonism. And so I've tried to adapt it um, to kind of serve what I need theologically nowadays. Um, I think Adam God is largely based off of heterosexual reproduction. And so the approach that I take to it is not. Um, I uh, take a sort of polytheistic approach. And so I actually worship Heavenly Mother chiefly. I have a picture of her right here. Um, and I think of her as um, Eve, or Asherah is what I call her. She's mentioned several times in the Bible. And so I think there's a place for it, but I think it's important to let everybody kind of have their own understanding. I think there's a lot of beauty in diversity, and learning from each other. I One of the largest parts of my talk is actually going to be on atheism as well, and the value of there not being divinity, and how that perspective has value in the restoration, because I think it does.
Yeah, I agree with that. My view on atheism. I have two of my best friends that I've known for 30 years or more. They're atheists, and they were once religious, but they're now atheist, and they're some of the most ethical people I know because they think through everything, and they don't have a religion that they fall back on anymore just on the basis of faith. Things have to make sense, and morality and ethics have to make sense and have to benefit human life, which I find really consistent with the message of the prophets and Jesus. So but yeah, I envision God as a heavenly parent. I'm fine with heavenly parents, heavenly mother, heavenly father. All that works for me, but the love that we see a human parent have for their child, that unconditional love, um, I do not see a God who has that type of love for us being upset if we don't believe in him. In the same way that a parent does not get upset when the child gets mad and storms to the room and says, "I'm never speaking to you again." Uh, the parent understands the child's going through this phase. I love them still. I know in the end they're going to love me. And I really believe that that's the way God operates. He's not vain. God, he, she, them, they're not vain. The character of godliness is not one of vanity and self-importance. In the New Testament, we read in the Epistle of John, God is love. And then you go to 1 Corinthians 13 and they give a definition of love. And if you just change the word love or charity to God, God is not puffed up. God does not seek his own. God
Yeah.
is long suffering. You get an idea what the character of the divine is. And whether the divine character, you think of it as Heavenly Father, Adam, Jesus, Heavenly Mother, Ashura, whatever, it's still the same character. And that's something that Orson Pratt actually talked about in some of his sermons about the plurality of God. There being many gods. He said there are many gods, but they are all one in that they're character. They are still the same type of character. And in the lectures on faith, I think the second and third lecture is all about the aspects, the attributes of God's character. And it's being long-suffering, loving, forgiving. And that character doesn't change. It's unchanging. And those aspects of these are things that we can cultivate. And one of the most radical things you find in the seventh article of faith is it says that when Jesus set about to save us or to save humanity, he set about to make them like God, who is the prototype of all saved beings. So this idea of God being a prototype for us is totally radical. That even though King Valiant Discourse was, 10 years later, this is something that totally blows the top off of traditional Christianity and traditional monotheism. The idea of God as a prototype for human beings. And I would say that that probably best describes the Reform Mormon approach. The divine is the prototype for humanity. And however you envision the divine, you know, it's what you are becoming. How is that affecting the way you interact with human beings, with people in this life, with the way you live your life, with your values, and with the type of person that you are becoming? Because being saved, according to the lectures on faith, is not about going somewhere. It's about becoming a type of person, a type of being. And that type of person, that type of being is manifested in God. And
So I got your website pulled up here, if you guys can see that. And
mhm,
I just wanted to um, point out here that you actually have a general conference. Your very first general conference is going to be
mhm,
this April 5th and 6th of
yep.
2025. And I'm assuming
Yep.
if I hit the events tab, yep, there it is. You're invited to the First Reform Mormon Conference, April 5th through 6th, 2025. And this gives information. So, folks, it's the website. I'll have links in the description to it. It's reformmormon.com. And go to the events section, and we'll give you the conference schedule. And also for people who want to participate in it as well. So, explain to explain to us the logistics of this conference and how people can participate.
So we are having our conference over YouTube, chiefly,
Okay.
YouTube and Zoom. So anybody is able to submit a talk for inclusion in our general conference, as long as you abide by some civility rules. Um, and that way it's kind of crowdsourced. It's not just Rob and I talking at you. Nobody necessarily wants to hear just Rob and I talking, and I don't want that either. Um, uh, we have a form on that page. You fill it out, either give us a link to the talk that you want to give. You can record it and give it to us immediately, or we can hit you up a couple of weeks before the conference and ask for that recording. Um, we'll upload them to our YouTube channel and we'll kind of premiere them one after another. And in we'll do that in the morning, and then in the afternoon, we'll have a Zoom meeting where we'll be able to get together and kind of talk about the concepts that were uh, in the morning session, and then we'll do the same thing on Sunday as well.
So this will be both pre-recorded but also live stuff going on.
Yes.
And then
Mhm.
and then people who want to participate, they can go in on the Zoom call and
Mhm.
then be part of the conversation. Is that my understanding?
Yes.
Um,
more or
We're
less.
gonna do kind of premiere the videos in the morning.
Hmm.
You can message us in the chat and what have you on YouTube, and then in the afternoon we'll have a Zoom meeting where we'll be able to talk about it and kind of do some fellowshipping.
And that Zoom meeting will also be broadcast on YouTube too, right? So people can, or is it just, I want to understand so how people can access all this.
I think it'll just be on the Zoom.
Okay.
It won't be broadcast. Um, I don't know how to do that. I'm the one that's going to be
And
doing it.
I think
So
with the Zoom with the actual the meeting on Zoom, I think we want people to feel free to say what they want
Oh,
and
okay.
explain anything. And people may not be comfortable with that if it's going to be videoed and then premiered on YouTube for the world to see. So
Okay,
we
got it.
want people to be comfortable. We realize that people,
Yeah,
especially if you're coming from an LDS background
right.
and family and stuff, it's just really hard. We think of being an LDS Mormon as a church, but it's really more than that. It's the culture. Um, heard something really interesting. A commentator back in 2012 when Romney was running for president, and there were all these comparisons to Romney being, he'd be the first Mormon president if he got elected, just like John Kennedy was the first Catholic. And someone made a very astute observation. He said, "No, Romney is not Mormon the way Kennedy was Catholic. Romney is Mormon the way Kennedy was Irish."
Irish. Yes.
And that is so true. I mean, I got goose pimples when I heard that. Because, yes, Mormonism it's a culture. It
Yep.
really is. Especially the Western Mormon, Rocky Mountain Mormonism, we'll call it. So yeah, and people, just because you leave the church, that doesn't mean you leave your culture. And so
Exactly.
many people, I've said this before in some other interviews, but so many LDS get disaffected with the church and leave it, not because they're rejecting the values they were taught in Mormon culture, but because they're embracing those values and they don't see church leaders being honest or, having integrity. And they want to have integrity. They want honesty. And they love that they have that love and that respect for honesty and integrity because of their Mormon upbringing,
Right. They
not
were taught
despite
those
it.
values.
Yeah.
Yes. And that I think that's really important. And I'm glad actually that, you're not recording or, people can participate in the Zoom conversation because, this is the thing. Like I've spent hours, I mean, literally hours off camera, whether it's a private Zoom or it's a phone call with people all the time who
Yeah.
are going through faith transitions or going
Me
through
too.
doubts. And you guys, both of you, I'm sure, both, have played a role, have similar conversations with
Yeah.
people throughout the world. And I realize like and I think what makes me unique in some ways is that I'm one of the few people that a Latter-day Saint can let their hair down in front of. I think, and you probably have the same experience as well,
Yep.
is
Yep.
that they can tell you and say things they would never tell somebody else in the ward or they would never tell their bishop. And so I feel like we also are a place that people can just tell, look, I remember when I first met Anthony Miller at a meetup that I was doing, one of my first meetups, I met up with Anthony Miller was there. And he said, over the course of the next 10 years, there are going to be 1 million shelves that are going to break in the Mormon corridor.
hmm
And we need to create a safe space, a safe landing spot for them. And that really hit me hard.
Yeah.
And also, what really hits me hard is the inadequacy of evangelicals to even for them people to even consider that as being a safe landing spot.
Yeah.
And it's so saddened to me because I've genuinely there are some great evangelical ministries and people that I've endorsed publicly on faithful sites, but there are many that just haven't been doing a good job. And I think when you brought up the whole, it's more like being Irish than Catholic
hmm
for Mitt Romney. I remember when that came out and I thought that hit it spot on. And I think a lot of these evangelicals ministries, if you will, that are trying to uh, show them the real Jesus or whatever they're trying to do, they miss that
Yeah.
and they don't get the culture. And if you don't understand the culture, there's no way you're going to be able to make any impact in that world. And so I really feel like yeah and and I got attacked by a ministry that has research in their name for saying I would feel really bad if somebody lost their faith in Mormonism because of something I said. And they attacked me on that. And I was like, if you understood what I was saying, you would
hmm
not attack me. Because what I was saying was, if I said something that caused somebody to leave Mormonism, that I understand the implications of that.
Yeah.
Loss of maybe job, maybe get divorced, get cut off from your family. There's a lot of sacrifice that people make, but also understanding the cultural aspect. It's like to then go and ask somebody to ask an Irishman to turn his back on being Irish.
Yeah.
It's an impossible thing. And so I think that's why I think that when we see other spaces that are more understanding of what these people are going through, who wouldn't want, even if you're a member of the church, do you really want people who are falling out of faith? Do you want them to just have messed up lives, or would you like to find them
And
having a good
that's it.
faith?
That's it. That's what we get so caught up in believing the right thing. I think I'm sounding like Joseph Smith here, and believing the correct doctrine that we're ready to read people out and excommunicate them and kick them out because they don't conform to what we believe or
Hmm.
to a set prescription.
Right?
And with the metaphor of the shelves breaking, yeah, but your shelves break. But we still need shelves. So you got to rebuild a shelf because we all have stuff to put on our shelves, emotional stuff, spiritual stuff,
Yep.
the way we deal with our past and what we're aspiring to for the future. We need a shelf for those things. And so if the faith shelf breaks, you have to rebuild a new shelf of some sort. If
Yeah.
you're deconstructing your religion and even throwing out religion, you still have to construct something to take its place because we're talking about the paradigm against which you understand yourself and the world and the purpose of your life and your aspirations and everything. We're talking about it's an aspect of your identity, whether you're religious or not. And when you are, if your identity is wrapped up in a particular faith and that faith is undermined or you lose it, you still have to replace it with something. Otherwise, how do you live? And I'm not
You
saying it
know,
has to be replaced with a religion, but it has to be replaced with some sort of philosophy. We have to have a philosophy. Every human being, whether they know it or not, has a philosophy that they're living by,
yep,
and they have values that they're living by.
exactly their core values of who they are. And
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I was over an hour and a half talking to a young man on the phone the other day, and he's grappling with doubts and all these things, And he goes to me and he's like, I kind of wish I can just go back to the Mormonism of everything is like rainbows and sunshine and everything's wonderful. And I said, you know what? I said, you're never going to go back to that.
No, that's a Mormon. That's the faith of a child.
Right,
That's the faith of being in Eden. Well, we
right,
left Eden. We're in the world now.
exactly.
And it's a lone and dreary place at
Yep.
times. It's
Hmm.
also a wonderful place at times too. There's
Yep.
opposition in all things. You have to see both sides. You can't have one without the other. And a faith that, or an understanding or a philosophy or a sense of self that reinforces that reality and strengthens you to deal with it is going to be a good thing in your life.
I and what I said to him in response, and I think this was very helpful to him. You know, I said, I've gone through the gauntlet, 13 years an atheist, also suffering lifelong depression and all the struggles that I've had too. I said, it's about finding peace. It's about being at peace with where you're at. I said, and again, scripture tells us having a peace that surpasseth all
All
understanding.
understanding. Yeah.
And when I said that to him, he said, wow. It's like it kind of had a breakthrough for him. And so that was a real privileged conversation I could have with him, somebody within the restoration who has their doubts. Maybe they're not going to talk to their bishop about this kind of stuff, but they feel that the safe. And so to me, that's a sacred ministry that
Yeah,
I have.
it is a ministry. It's a My understanding of priesthood is very much ministry, and we all have it. We all have priesthood. We all have ministry. We all have a calling because we're in this together. Whether we
Right.
believe same things or not, we're on this earth
Yep.
together,
Hmm.
and we are more alike than we're unlike, and we have to love onto that. And I read the teachings of Jesus, and he says, if you want to go give your offering at the altar, and your brother has something against you.
Hmm.
You reconcile with your brother and then you go to God. We have it backwards. We think we have to go to God first and then you know, we can go to minister to everybody else. No, we go to each other first and then we come to God.
So, Evan, I think you've been probably one of the most important guests that I've ever had on my program. And it's been a real honor and privilege to have part of your journey and your story documented on the in this space.
Hmm.
And I just wanted you to speak to the importance of being able to tell your story and the importance for other people to be able to tell their stories and why you feel it's really important that they share their stories at your general conference coming up in April.
Yeah. I, as a bisexual, transgender, polyamorous woman, am quite unique in the restoration, and I know that. Um, and I, I think because of the unique life I have lived, I think I bring perspectives that a lot of people don't necessarily have. Um, and I know other people have a lot of experiences that I haven't had. And so I want to hear from them. I think there's a lot of beauty in that diversity. Um, I've heard it said, during creation, um, land and sea were created, but there were also kind of in between spaces created as well, marshes and beaches. And, there was day and night that was created, but there's also dawn and dusk. There's a wide spectrum of a whole bunch of different experiences. And I think reducing it down to just a couple does um, Mormonism a disservice and humanity a disservice. So I very much want to hear from people who hold different beliefs than mine because I have nothing to lose and a lot to gain from hearing from other people, um, which I think is a good way of going about it.
Love it. So just real quick, once again, folks, this is the reformmormon.com.
And the great thing about
And
this website, Steve, is
yes,
Evan has put links on there to every other website, podcast, Facebook group having to do with Reform Mormonism. And
If you
so,
go to library,
yeah, it's a library of things. And I mean, we have a Facebook group, the Mormon Community Reform, that we invite anybody to join. And we hear everything on there. We are very respectful, but people are free to post any idea, ask any questions, give any opinions they want. And I'm really proud of our group. It's only about 400 to 500 people, but we have some really great discussions. And people say have some really great things that they share based on their experiences and their beliefs and their understandings of Mormonism and just faith in general. But also one thing that we decided the theme for the conference is reclaiming.
okay.
And so, that's the theme of reclaiming Mormonism, reclaiming whatever, and the reclaiming through Mormonism, through your experiences with Mormonism.
So yeah, you can see there's quite a bit going on this website and a lot of good resources. So we're going to make sure
Yep.
that we have this in the description so people can check it out. Also want you to send me a link for those of you for to be able to people are interested in purchasing the book Digger. We'll have that in the description as well. And I noticed that my interview with you was like the first one listed on podcasts, and it's been almost 2 years. It's hard to believe, man.
I know it.
Crazy, crazy. What a crazy couple of years it's been, and what a great journey that all of us have been on. I
Yeah.
mean, what a fantastic story this is. Being able to just engage all these interesting individuals and people and even going to Evan and saying, I think you should look check out Reform Mormonism. And
And
next
he
thing you know,
did.
you're organizing a conference. And I think that's awesome. It's awesome. So we love you all here at Mormon Book Reviews and really appreciate Evan. You're just a wonderful human being. And Rob, it was a real privilege being amongst the first to ever interview you and kind of get you out there and get your story out there. And for you guys, both of you, as humans, as image bearers, be able to tell your stories.
Well, thank
yeah.
you. Thank you. Thank you for all you're doing. I've said all along that we first communicated, I just so appreciated your approach to the whole Mormon question, shall we call it,
Yep.
the way you're dealing with the restoration as an evangelical. I mean, it's wonderful the way you're approaching it and what you're doing.
Thank you. Well, I do think there's a divine aspect to this as well. And I'd like to hear your comments on that. So leave us some comments and please check out their website. Please check out the conference. It's be very interesting. I think I'll probably hop in a couple of those Zoom calls and rattle some cages if necessary, have some fun.
Okay.
But And so, yeah, make sure you check it out. Check out their website. Check out Reform Mormonism. See if it's something that would be interesting for you to try out. Maybe you're one of those people who's on a journey. Maybe you're looking for a community. Maybe this be a good place, a good landing spot for you.
Yeah.
So see what it's all about. And I'd also love to hear from people who are members of different various restoration movements and hear what your thoughts about Reform Mormonism and does it bring something to the table that could be beneficial to your movement as well. So again, we'll have links in the description for everything that we talked about. Also, for those of you who'd like to financially support the channel, we'll have links in there as well. But the most important thing is this: all the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.